session, I just wanted to introduce Jörg and Matt. So Jörg from MongoDB, our Director of Financial Industry Solutions for the first session. I just thought it'd be great if you could just introduce yourself, your role, and then we'll go over to Matt and get the event started.
Thank you, Jack. Hello, everybody. As Jack said, my name is Jörg Schmöcker. I lead our Financial Services Industry Solutions team. For the last 25 years, I worked in various roles ranging from IT manager to FX structured products trader in multiple banks. And I joined MongoDB about a year ago to take my current position. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jörg. And Matt, the Head of Banking and Capital Markets at UNQork, if you'd like to introduce yourself and your role, that'd be fantastic.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jack. It's great to be here. I lead our banking and capital markets industry vertical at UNQork. For those of you that don't know, UNQork is a platform that allows enterprises to build complex solutions without any code whatsoever. I've been working in the banking and capital markets industry for the last 20 years in the advisory space, and it's a pleasure to be here today and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. Thank you, Matt. And over to you, Jörg, to kick off the session.
Sure, thank you. So here's our agenda. I'm going to talk briefly about some trends and pressures that we see and that make this no-code movement interesting and the Unqork solution. Then Matt will take over to present what can be done in this space with a little bit of a demo. And then I'm going to wrap up with how this is relevant to MongoDB quickly. So let's dive into this. Over the last 25 years, financial services has undergone rapid changes or significant changes. I still find this interesting what's going on and how much more can change. And literally the only constant in this picture has been that change. The latest or most surprising move for me personally was that now payments has become a hotbed of innovation. Right? We see not only that people are driving towards more and more electronic payments, which puts cost pressure on the single transaction. We also have requirements from regulators that balances that are transferred from one account to another have to be available within seconds and not as it used to be in days. I remember that was a big outcry maybe 20, 30 years ago when settlement went from 5 days to 2 days. Now we're talking about 10 seconds, depending on where you are. Also, customers are raising the bar more and more of what they're expecting from banks. This is not only in terms of the service and the performance, but it's also in terms of fraud detection and other things that people expect that the bank protects them efficiently from these kind of things. And then the regulation never stops. We've have T+1 regulation for our security settlements. We have the NACHA rules for the ACH payments. We have Reg E for other concerns. So all of that is changing constantly. You can look at open banking in Europe. You can look all around the globe. There's constant change, and that's the only thing that is really there. So why is this a problem? Now, there's multiple hurdles for banks to tackle in this space. And this is true for banks as well as other financial service providers like card companies and everybody else. So replacing the existing infrastructure that banks have built over probably decades is really hard. These systems are batch driven often and not real time. So if you talk about 10 seconds, you would have to run a batch every 10 seconds. I don't think that's viable. And the timelines for change that are set by the market and the regulators are too short to really change these systems and replace them. So, people have to build around these systems. They're struggling to find the resources or development teams that can actually build this stuff in the timeline that they have. It's hard to scale teams. As soon as you reach the proverbial 2-pizza team, you end up with 2 teams, you end up with 2 systems. So all of these things make it really hard. I think the most challenging thing here is really you actually have to change things while you're still running. It's not like you can shut down your bank for a year don't do any payments, and then you just open the door again and people walk into a new payment infrastructure. I come from a trading background, as I said, and I often compare this to performing heart surgery on a marathon runner while he's running a race. So it's really hard to change these things without failure. And then the result of that is that we often ended up with bolt-on solution. We usually call this the N+1 system problem, which means that you have disparate pools of data, information, and systems all over the place. And then last but not least, a lot of these processes require the integration of machine-based and human-based workflows. We'll talk about those in a moment, but not only do you need them from a business point of view, but you also need them often to paper over the cracks between your different systems that you've built up. These systems can be from mergers and acquisitions, but they can also be because you couldn't change your mainframe fast enough, you're adding capabilities to your core system. So when we look at how, here we go, how we can tackle this problem is, in my FX structuring job, we had a highly adaptable workflow with lots of steps that only machines could do. Nobody can manually run a Monte Carlo simulation, and lots of steps that were depending on humans. What's the benefit of using humans in a system? Everybody thinks when we talk about a system about a technical component, something like a backend or mainframe or things like that. But systems theory says a system is actually something that is composed out of natural and artificial components that interact. Natural components, I assume they mean humans most of the time. And obviously, when we talk about artificial, we talk about computers and machines. So what is the benefit of having human components? They're highly adaptable. And they can apply judgment in the steps. So if something looks wrong, they're probably going to raise their hand and figure it out. The Toyota production line was famous for everybody could pull the cord and stop the production if something went wrong. There's a problem with humans though, right? They are less reliable than machines. We just all make little small errors that are not relevant in our day-to-day life. They're not very well scalable. Either you have, because of training effort, but also, just they need a lot of space. You can't rack them like you can do with CPUs. And they also will execute these tasks in a slightly bespoke way. And it's really hard to reproduce why somebody made a decision because we don't have an audit log of our thoughts, fortunately. Machine-driven steps in the workflow have different strengths and weaknesses. They're really, really rigid. It's really, really hard to change them. And we've invested in better and better software development practices for I don't know how many years. I think we got a lot better than punching punch cards, but we're still not in a really easy way to do this. There's people that say ChatGPT will solve that. We'll see if it will deliver it. They're expensive and risky to change. As I said before, if you change a human workflow, people will figure out if something goes wrong. If you change a machine workflow, this machine might send millions of dollars around the world without anybody checking it before you even know it because they're fast as well. Now we come to the benefits. They're very reliable, especially if you have clustered solutions. They're scalable. Once you've programmed the software once, you can copy it onto millions of that, even more machines, and they will all execute the program truthfully and correctly. And everything you do with a machine is and can be reproducible. How about getting the best of both worlds? I think this is what Matt will show us a little later and explore a little more, what you can do with a solution like Unqork. It gives you the ability to evolve quickly because you have those human components that are super flexible. If you can tie them together effectively, you become cost efficient. You can maintain stuff quickly. You do get the automation where you need it. And if you can restrict the human intervention to the non-happy path, it's always easy to program the path. That's what we used to call the happy path when nothing goes wrong. But if you can have humans to step in if something goes wrong, those are the really, really expensive paths to code. but they also don't happen that often. So you can join the scalability of execution on the happy path with exception handling and human intervention. And the whole thing becomes reproducible and auditable because you can actually track the results of human decisions. When you bring this all together in a platform, you can also use the data you're collecting while the process is running to drive your automation and execution decisions, to invest in your exception management and drive all these things forward. So what are typical use cases for this stuff? So from my old world, the post-trade exception management is a strong part where many, many people are using these hybrid workflows. Because ultimately, machines struggle figuring out why something breaks in the settlement process. We'll see that in the demo. I already mentioned that instant payments are a place where so much is moving that it's very important. There's also some SLAs that are set by the regulators that have been driving out some of our customers to adopt much more streamlined solutions here and really work on the exception management. And then last but not least, as I mentioned before, if it's easy and fast to transfer money, you really need proper fraud detection. And that sometimes needs human intervention, especially if you want to minimize the number of false positives. Because there's nothing worse than having too many false positives. People will stop using your credit card or your payment solution if that happens too often. At this point, I would like to hand over to Matt Singleton from Unqork, who will walk you through the specific solution that they have prepared for us. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jörg. And I think the challenges and issues that are presented in any ecosystem in a bank or a buy or sell side firm are quite complex. And as we talked about, are evolving constantly. And that's where the combination and power of a platform like Unqork, where you're able to build and evolve complex enterprise applications and solutions without any code, with MongoDB embedded as our a core data platform from MongoDB Atlas perspective, really enables a very flexible, powerful, and enterprise-grade platform can truly scale not only core machine-based workflows, but also these hybridized workflows in a way that's quite powerful. And there are three key pieces that call your attention to as we kind of walk through this that are very important. So the first one that you'll see as we go through and kind of bring to life some solutions in this space is the ability to unify ecosystems is very important. I think one thing that we all know and recognize is that every organization has a plethora of legacy platforms and systems, new systems and providers, third parties. And so the ecosystems are quite varied in their complexity. Some may be mainframe based, some may be still file and batch based, some are more modern REST or SOAP based APIs. And so the ability to actually bring this all together is very, very challenging. And so one of the things that Unqork really focuses on is being able to bring together these ecosystems of data and information and tools very, very seamlessly. And so by adding Unqork into your stack, you're creating unification and orchestration seamlessly across the tech stack. And that's very important because the minute you have to swivel chair or break that link, the concept of a truly straight through process and a hybrid workflow really, really fails, right? And so that's something that we'll see that's very important today. Now, unifying an ecosystem and being able to see and look at the information in a consistent way is important. But the second point here is, how do we actually action on this information and data in a way that allows us to be creating straight through process? So how do we codelessly orchestrate and fill functionality gaps and remove this swivel chairing from our data end users and create the ability to take a challenge, an issue, or an exception in this example and resolve it straight through. And then the third point is we all know that once you create a system or workflow or hybridized workflow like this, the minute you go live, you will be starting to be out of date. You will need to evolve the solution. You will need to change it very quickly. And so because Unqork is a completely codeless platform, we're never generating any code. And because MongoDB Atlas powers us to be able to capture these changes very rapidly in the platform, not only from a data model perspective, but from a configuration perspective, Unqork can be changed completely codelessly and continue to evolve your solutions. You can very easily swap out platforms. You can add new ones. You can bring in new data elements. You can change how data is being ETL'd in or out of the platform as those payloads change. And you can create brand new workflows and processes, change owners, all through configuration. And so, to the analogy you argued earlier, we can continue to fly the plane here while changing it very rapidly and not really think about, okay, do we have to shut down the system? What's the interim? How do we make this change? And so this evolution is very, very seamless in Unqork and completely codeless. So from a solution perspective, enabling post-trade automation is a great use case for how MongoDB and Unqork really can work together, and especially in light of the market trends around achieving T+1 settlement timeframe and even beyond T+0 is something that's a very powerful value proposition here as our approach works together. And so when we look at what most firms in this space, I think what their biggest transition hurdles are to actually achieving T+1, the top three challenges are all ones that the Unqork and MongoDB model really address. So one is in-house technology changes. Rather than a rip and replace approach, how can a solution like Unqork really come in, complement your existing tech stack, and allow you to create that straight-through process in a much more seamless and cost-effective way. Secondly is dependency on vendors. So again, because of the flexible nature of the Unqork platform and because of how MongoDB is leveraged within our platform, we can make sure that our platform conforms to the information and data and approach that vendors are using. So rather than having a very rigid model of this is what we expect, and if we don't have that, we cannot operate, we can really conform to what vendors are able to provide very easily. And so that makes the dependency on vendors much less onerous and much less serious. And then the third one here around getting necessary resources and funding, as you would imagine from a platform perspective, from a no-code perspective, the time to market we see is generally over 3 times faster than what you would see if you had to use an alternative solution, whether that is a low-code solution or even building from scratch, and the cost is significantly less. And also the budget required from a maintenance perspective, because again, you're maintaining this visually, and the total cost of ownership is from what we typically see over 65% lower over time as well. And so these top 3 concerns are really alleviated by the solution that we have with Unqork. So I think it's very exciting. And so what I'd like to do at this point in time is pull up a demo. So I think we'll kind of shift over the screen here at this point. And just to bring this to life a little bit, I don't think we're not going to go into too much detail, but what you're going to see as this screen is prepared and gets pulled up is that everything that is being built is completely codeless that you're seeing here. So all of this solution is fully built using configuration. And to have a successful hybrid process, the concept of this unification and it needs to start with a unified view of what your queue is and what information you need to be focused on as a human, right? Sort of the machine-based processing is in the background, but from an interface perspective, how do we make sure that we're prioritizing for the humans involved in this process what they're looking at? And so in the case of post-trade exception management, what we're looking at here is an analyst workbench that is enabling you to prioritize based on your service level agreements, based on your independently set criteria, what exceptions you should be focusing on in order to achieve the resolution time that's set forth. And so what you're looking at here is something that has fed in data from trading platforms and OMSs and reconciliation platforms like Aduco or others, and really implementing the custom prioritization logic of this particular trading desk, in this case equities, to highlight key exceptions for human intervention. And so from this single pane of glass, we're looking at this, and you can see it looks more like a dashboard, but the important part is that you can actually interact directly with this to now start to resolve these exceptions directly from this prioritized queue. So if we actually go ahead in this application here and select a particular exception here, what you'll see is that utilizing the power of MongoDB Atlas, we're able to now define a tailored exception workflow that leverages the core data models that we've ingested from the trading platforms and from the reconciliation systems, but they can be quickly and rapidly supplemented with unique and distinct additional data from files and documents and other systems, and even communication platforms to create straight-through processing. And so one of the things that you'll see here is that the expectation that individuals are going to communicate simply from logging into a platform like Unqork is unlikely. People still will use chat and email. How do we actually now create a unified ecosystem that not only captures the structured data, but also the unstructured data? So you can see here, we just kicked off a message. We reached out to a trader. This was the counterparty exception. And we initiated the communication, but what you'll see quickly here is that if we drag our communication screen onto the desktop here, in this particular case, we're using Slack. What we've done is we've automatically created a channel, and I think we're just going to try to pull that in. I think for some reason the Slack screen is not showing. I think we might just need to move desktops. Apologies for that. I think it's a screen share. There we go. So what we've done here is automatically, based on that exception process, we've created a channel in Slack, pulled in the appropriate trader, the back office and middle office teams, and created the ability for the operations team to actually have a conversation in a method of communication that they would normally, and provide answers and structured data and unstructured data into Slack and continue that conversation there. Meanwhile, if you look here on the back end of the platform, you can see that we're actually capturing this into the platform in an unstructured way in the audit history on the bottom here. So we can capture all this communication back and forth as we go through the resolution process. And the reason this is super powerful is that, as you know, with any hybrid workflow, the ability to sort of make sure that you understand how it's evolved, especially as a case works through the system, is very important. And the minute you have communications happening offline or via tools or systems where people don't feel comfortable using them, you don't capture that history and information. And so again, coming back to the power of being able to leverage MongoDB Atlas on the back end for us to be able to not only bring in the structured data on the trade level, but also the unstructured data around this communication is very, very powerful and important as well. And this creates a truly rich history of information, documents, and context that travels with this exception throughout the entire workflow. Now, the other thing that we'll show is, so obviously you can make sure you make updates to the case here. But one thing that we'll actually look at now is, this is a counterparty exception type, but what happens when you have a new exception type? What happens when you move into an environment where you get an exception on your workbench, but it's not really defined from a resolution process perspective as well. So if we go back to our workbench and we pull that up on the screen. What we're going to do here now is actually we've identified that there's a new exception type here. And what we're going to show you is how you can actually create this exception type in the platform and create the resolution pathway, all without actually having to code directly from an interface. And so the power here of being able to maintain and define the tailored exception workflow that leverages this core standard data models and they can quickly evolve is something that you'll see here. So if you take a look at what we have on the screen, the first piece of ability here you can see here is the ability to define individual statuses. So you're not tied to a rigid statusing model. You can also tailor and define key actions as well, whether that's the integration with a communication platform, a document-based system, et cetera, or even notifications as well. So the ability to actually tailor that messaging that you saw, the email outreach, et cetera. And then when you're looking at these actions, if we just click add action here for a moment, we can actually start to see that you can not only define the actual core action here, but you can also identify and put the roles that are relevant into the key here. So we're actually leveraging integration with the IDPs. And so you can see which roles that you want to actually leverage this part of the process. You can leverage which status that you've put in up above to make sure that you can tie that step of the process and the action to where that should be occurring. And then you can really make sure that you tailor whether or not there is an action like an update or a addition of data or the ability to add it to a checklist. All these different pieces can be configured, right? And the power here is that you're able to do this as an operations user. And so as you define this, you can directly launch this back into the environment that you've created this in to create a truly end-to-end exception resolution process without having to go back and start to build a coded solution. And this allows for that much more rapid evolution from a solutioning perspective. So I think just quickly, we're going to switch back to the slides just to wrap up so we can make sure we have enough time for questions. But what you saw here, right, at the end of the day is the ability to unify an ecosystem of data from trading platforms, reconciliation engines, chat systems, communications, and analytics to be able to create an end-to-end hybrid workflow that's really powerful. And you can see that the model of Unqork being codeless, leveraging MongoDB Atlas from a flexibility perspective, really enables that in a much more flexible way than what you've seen in the traditional environment. It allows you to evolve that much more rapidly. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jörg at this point to make some additional final thoughts on this, and then we can leave some time for questions.
Help us unmute. Thank you, Matt. That's very interesting. So, I pulled out when we prepared for this, I thought about, where did I see workflows where this model would be immediately applicable? And I'm sure everybody who is, listening now has been thinking, this would be cool to use there or there or there. So here are some places where our customers are using solutions with hybrid workflows. Loan origination, this can be mortgages, this can be car loans, but it can also be loan syndication, the classic example. Corporate payment support. Corporate payments is a big issue because, they have higher fail rates than we see in other areas, and they come in bulk, so you need an efficient way to process them. Derivatives pricing I already mentioned. And then last but not least, customer onboarding and KYC. That is something that frequently, is a hybrid workflow, even if it's not for the whole thing, but for some of it. When we, look at this, Matt already mentioned that they built this platform on MongoDB. Why is MongoDB such a good platform for this and build similar, this thing? So at the core, we're a document database. When we talk about documents, we're not talking about Word documents or Excel or something like that. We're talking about structured data with potentially relatively deep hierarchies. This allows you to add information, add fields, add columns, add sub-collections at any point in time when you want to. It makes an extensible data model, which is super important if you wanted to add all the richness that Matt just presented to it. We're putting this all together on a developer data platform that allows many, many different ways to get to the data, query the data, and organize the data in a very reliable, resilient, and scalable and secure way. Without further, I would like now to go to the questions sections. So if there are any questions, please. Jack, Mallory?
Yes, we did have some questions come in. First of all, thank you both so much. That was incredibly interesting. So a few of the questions that came in, the first one is, when you have custom workflows, maintaining these can be hard. How do you go about overcoming this? I believe this is directed towards Matt.
Yeah. So I think, again, as we saw in some of the demo, right? The ability to maintain your logic without having to go back to modifying a code base and creates a lot more flexibility. And the way the Unqork platform works enables you to really evolve logic in a very piecemeal way. And so you're never building a monolith. And so when you're building in our platform, think of it as like adult Legos. The different pieces and logic and components that need to happen can all be built in a very modular way. And so I think the approach to building these workflows is to keep them modular, keep them flexible, and keep them on a platform like Unqork using MongoDB Atlas, where you're not really tied to a rigid data model, where you can create a core schema, but then also evolve the additional data that you require to make those workflows meet business needs, much more flexible, much more possible.
You're on mute, Mallory.
I am on mute. Perfect. All right. Our next question. How do I enforce data models in such a flexible environment?
Is that for me?
That is for you, Jörg.
Okay. Yeah. So while we always talk about the flexibility of the document model, you can enable schema validation, which can provide you with the core guardrails so that you at least can make some sense. Your application can make sense, and your humans can make sense of the data model. I think Matt alluded to that already. The key thing is when you have a document data model and you define a core schema is the extensibility. You can add to it. When we look at our customers that are building solutions on top of MongoDB, they usually adopt a policy where they say, we're flexible with ingestions, we're fault tolerant there. Because again, if you get something similar to Matt's example, if you get through an API, something that doesn't have a counterparty, it should kick up into your exceptions flow and not be a message that is just rejected or something else. That is an exceptions flow. So receiving an invalid entry is an exception by itself and should be handled by your workflow. That's what we built this system for in the first place. And then when it comes to emitting data, systems should be much more stringent in emitting data. But that means that the data storage or transport layer should probably be relatively tolerant with things. We see a lot of customers building across those paradigms. It's very different than what we used to do 20 years ago when we were very stringent with the data models. People getting to the point that they say, actually, data models evolve. We have to live with change. And as long as we're only adding fields, we're extending the data model, there shouldn't be any problems. But there are occasional break-in changes. And then for that, there is versioning on the document. You can have multiple versions stored in the same document. So that's the same data in different languages, so to speak. All of those are possible mitigation strategies. Matt, which ones are you using for Unqork by default?
So we enable you to use and configure them in any way that you want. So what we have the concept of in Unqork is as you build, the model is flexibly evolving natively without having to create a schema. And we give you the ability to either import schemas from other systems as you're bringing them in, or you can enforce a schema and create what we call a schema module in Unqork to say, here's our core And if you receive data that does not meet that schema, or you try to work outside of that schema, you create exceptions within the build of the application that don't allow you to move outside of that particular schema for that part of the application. So we really enable you to do a hybrid out of the box. And it's really at the module and configuration level how you want to implement those structural models.
Thank you.
Thank you. And we've got one last question as we're coming up on time. But from what both of you have seen, at what point do organizations choose to modernize and invest in modernization? Matt, do you want to start with you?
Yeah. So I think, really at the end of the day, there's usually a breaking point that's reached either due to business limitations or regulatory changes that really push the limits of what a client is able to do with their existing platforms and systems that we're working with. And so it's really the point at which that business flexibility or the regulatory ability to meet regulatory needs comes to the surface, where we see that greatest impetus to change, and really where you can start to very quickly make the business case for the ROI and the investment in what's needed to be done. And so what we've seen is, because we're able to reduce that cost of execution and the total cost of ownership, a lot of initiatives from a business perspective that wound up lower on a priority list because they just were insurmountably expensive. We've been able to reduce that payback period, increase the ROI, and reduce that total cost of ownership to be able to greenlight a lot more initiatives that have really been driving business impact that traditionally wouldn't have been funded. So I think those are sort of the areas that really where we see that impetus for modernization, and how we're kind of helping to accelerate a lot of those pieces as well. Jorg, over to you.
I think there's two. When we talk about modernization, there's the one thing is when they modernize their development strategies and whatever platform they're adopting for new development. I think that happens continuously all the time. Especially if there's major changes they need to make, then a step into a new technology is much more likely, or a new platform like Unqork or MongoDB. The second piece is, I love bicycles. I can always buy a new bicycle. That's modernization. I don't think people buy platforms like MongoDB or Unqork because they want to have a new shiny toy in their basement, like my bicycles. So normally there needs to be a strong business driver. Often that can be scalability, cloud adoption. Sometimes it's actually that they can't even get people to build on their COBOL or TL1 their platforms anymore. So they have to make a transition and replace their platforms. Those are the drivers that we see frequently for modernization. Thank you, Mallory.
Thank you. And maybe we need to come up with a MongoDB bicycle now. Add it to your collection.
Thank you. I only have 7, so an 8th one would be great.
All right. Well, that is the time we have for this session. Once again, thank you, gentlemen.